The day my mother died, my daughter stopped speaking. Not completely. She still answered questions when people asked her directly. She still whispered, "Thank you," when neighbors brought food to the house. But the spark inside 17-year-old Ava disappeared, and honestly, I understood why. My mother wasn't just her grandmother. She was her safe place. After my divorce, when my ex-husband vanished into another state with his new girlfriend and unpaid child support, my mother stepped in without hesitation. She helped me raise Ava. She picked her up from school, sat through dance recitals, stayed awake during fevers. She loved that girl with every part of her heart. So when cancer took her in less than 8 months, it shattered us both. I remember standing in my mother's kitchen after the funeral, staring at the untouched casserole dishes lining the counter. The house smelled like lilies and coffee and grief. Family members filled every room pretending to mourn. But I noticed something strange. Whispers, cold glances, conversations stopping when I walked in. At first, I thought maybe it was just tension from the funeral. Families become strange when someone dies. Old wounds reopen. Jealousies crawl back to the surface. But what I didn't know that day was that my own relatives were already planning something cruel. 3 days later, my older brother Daniel called me. "We need to discuss Mom's estate," he said flatly. No sympathy, no warmth, just business. I almost laughed from exhaustion. "Daniel, we just buried her." "Well, lawyers don't wait forever." Something about his tone made my stomach tighten. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at my mother's house. Daniel said everyone needed to attend. Him, my Aunt Patricia, my cousin Elise, and me. But when Ava and I arrived that afternoon, something immediately felt wrong. There were 2 unfamiliar men sitting at the dining room table in expensive suits. Lawyers, and the second Ava walked into the room, every pair of eyes turned toward her, like she was the target. Daniel folded his hands slowly. "Before we begin, there are concerns about your daughter's influence over Mom during her final months." I froze. "What?" Patricia sighed dramatically. "Your mother changed. Her will very suddenly." Ava looked confused beside me, fragile, nervous, and then Daniel slid papers across the table. Legal, documents, highlighted, sections, statements accusing my daughter, my grieving teenage daughter, of manipulating her dying grandmother for inheritance money. I felt the blood drain from my face. "She was a child," I whispered, but Daniel leaned back. Calmly, "Children can still manipulate people." That was the moment. Something inside me broke. Not from grief, from rage. Because they weren't mourning my mother. They were hunting her money, and they had chosen my daughter as the easiest victim. What they didn't know was that my mother saw everything before she died, and she left me something far more powerful than inheritance. She left me receipts. For the next week, my family treated Ava like a criminal. Daniel claimed Mom had been confused near the end of her illness. Patricia insisted Ava spent too much time alone with her grandmother. Elise even hinted online that certain people had manipulated an elderly woman for financial gain. I watched my daughter shrink more every day. She stopped leaving her room, stopped answering texts from friends. One night I found her, crying quietly in bed, clutching one of my mother's sweaters. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. That sentence destroyed me, because innocent people say that differently than guilty ones. There was no anger in her voice, just heartbreak. I sat beside her and held her while she cried into my shoulder, like she did when she was little. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would burn every lie they built around her, carefully, legally, completely. The next morning, I drove to my mother's attorney's office alone. Mr. Whitmore had handled her legal affairs for years. He looked exhausted when I entered. I was hoping you'd come, he admitted quietly. Then, he handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting. My hands shook. Opening it, inside was a letter and a flash drive. The letter read, "If you're reading this, then Daniel and Patricia are doing exactly what I feared they would do. They care more about money than family. I changed my will because I finally saw people clearly near the end of my life, especially who truly loved me." Tears blurred my vision. "Mr. Whitmore," gently pointed to the flash drive. "Your mother requested these recordings be kept safe." Recordings. I stared at him in confusion. Then I plugged the drive into my laptop, right there in his office. The first audio clip began playing. It was Daniel's voice, clear as day. "Can't believe you're leaving. Money to Ava," he snapped in the recording. "She's not even an adult." Then my mother answered, calmly, "She loved me when none of you visited." Silence. Then Patricia's voice entered. "She's turning that girl against the family." And then came the part that changed everything. My mother said quietly, "No, you turned yourselves against this family the moment money mattered more than love." I covered my mouth, stunned. There were 6 recordings total. 6. Each one documented private conversations where Daniel and Patricia pressured my mother to rewrite the will. They insulted Ava repeatedly, called her easy to manipulate, accused me of raising her to take advantage of an old woman. But the worst recording came last. Daniel actually laughed while saying, "Once she's gone, Ava won't stand a chance against real lawyers." I felt cold all over listening to it, because they had planned this long before my mother died. They were waiting, preparing, and my mother knew it. That evening, another letter arrived at my house. Official court notice. Daniel was formally contesting the will. Ava panicked immediately. "Mom, are we going to lose Grandma's house?" I looked at her frightened face and realized something important. This was never about property anymore. This was about protecting my daughter from people who wanted to destroy her emotionally, just to get richer. So I stopped being afraid and started preparing. I hired an attorney, organized every document saved, every text message, every voicemail, every social media post Elise had made, hinting at elder abuse. And when the court date finally arrived 2 months later, my family walked in smiling. They thought they had already won, until everything changed. The courtroom was painfully quiet when the hearing began. Daniel sat confidently beside his attorney, wearing the same arrogant expression he'd worn his entire life whenever he thought money gave him power. Patricia avoided looking at me completely, and Ava, my poor daughter, looked terrified sitting beside me. So I squeezed her hand gently and whispered, "It ends today." Daniel's lawyer began by painting a cruel picture. They described Ava as emotionally influential, claimed my mother had been vulnerable during chemotherapy, suggested I had encouraged closeness between grandmother and granddaughter to secure financial gain. I could actually hear people murmuring behind us. Ava's eyes filled with tears, and honestly, for one horrible moment, I felt afraid, because lies told confidently can sound dangerously believable. Then our attorney stood, calm, prepared. He requested permission to present recorded evidence directly from my mother. The judge agreed, and suddenly, Daniel's confidence disappeared. The first recording echoed through the courtroom speakers, then the second, then the third. One by one, every lie collapsed publicly. The courtroom heard Daniel mocking Ava. They heard Patricia pressuring a dying woman for money. They heard my mother defending her granddaughter over and over again. But the final recording completely destroyed them. Daniel's own voice filled the room. Once she's gone, Ava won't stand a chance against real lawyers. The silence afterward felt enormous, heavy, embarrassing. I looked over at Daniel, and for the first time in my life, he looked small, not powerful, not important, just exposed. The judge looked furious. By the end of the hearing, the contest was dismissed entirely, but it didn't stop there, because Daniel and Patricia's behavior became public record. Family friends heard about the recordings. Their church community heard. Their business associates heard. And suddenly, the people who once acted superior found themselves avoiding phone calls and explaining uncomfortable questions. Meanwhile, Ava slowly began healing. A week after court, she walked into the kitchen wearing one of her grandmother's old cardigans and smiled for the first time in months. "You know what Grandma used to tell me?" she asked softly. "What?" She said, "People eventually reveal who they are when money gets involved." I smiled sadly. She was right. We ended up selling my mother's house a year later, not because we needed to, but because neither of us could carry the grief inside those walls anymore. Instead, we used part of the inheritance to start fresh. New city, new apartment, new memories, and every year on my mother's birthday, Ava and I cook her favorite lemon pie recipe together. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, but we always talk about her with love, not money, not courtrooms, not betrayal, because in the end, my family lost something far more valuable than inheritance. They lost trust, respect, family, and me. I learned something painful but important. The people who fight hardest for money are often the ones who love the least, but the people who protect you when you're broken, those are your real family.